Hi everyone, it's Jerry. This is Game 4 from the 2013 World Chess Championship match between Anand and Carlsen. Going into this round, both players are level at 1.5 points each, and Anand on the white end in this one opened with e4, Carlsen replying e5, and for the first time in this match we see the Ruy Lopez. And to be more exact, we have the Berlin defense with knight takes e4, and still running further with this very common line. It is white giving up the bishop pair in exchange for what exactly? Well, black now has a damaged queenside structure. Black is also uncastled, and positive for white here is a 4-3 majority on the king side. Where is the positive for black? Well, it has to do with having the bishop pair. So one other detail to note is that this particular advantage of a 4-3 majority on the queen side, eventually you'd like to advance those pawns and create a passed pawn. But you certainly need to be cautious about how exactly you advance them. In the game we saw h3, which is quite common and a prelude to the g4 advance. It's not enough to just recognize you have a majority and say, I'm going to advance them and eventually get a passed pawn. Doing something very abrasive like g4 is setting yourself up for some serious problems. The bishop currently hitting at g4, and it could be defended, but black could hack away at that point. You could hit here, black could defend, and you could do something like this, but that's not the direction to go in for white. This is not the dream square for the f-pawn. The f-pawn does not want to be around to watch over g4. It wants to be up here on f5, where it forms a pawn duo on the 5th rank. One other detail, just to emphasize something here, is that g5, if g5 is played, this is bad not only for this reason, where the pawn could be captured, but let's just assume it is defended. Let's just say the king is on this h2 square to defend. This move is still bad, and the reason for that is because the f5 square is now a hole in the white kingside position, and these pieces can be making use of it, and what was once a perfectly healthy structure on the white side is no longer. So we don't go down that road. h3 first, and we get more development in. It's quite tame on the black side. In short order, we'll have king c8, b6, king b7, and black will have been successful with artificially castling. So we have that. Black does get out of the pin. The dark square bishops come off. And white prepares to now double on the d file. c5 initially I thought was to vacate c6 for the minor pieces. You could see that in some lines, but I believe the primary function of this move is to watch over d4 so that you secure an eventual bishop e6 position, just as the pawn on h6 is doing. So we have white following up with the doubling on the d file. Bishop plays to e6, and now knight e1 retreating so as to get the pawns in motion, get this f4 move in, and get the majority rolling. So it's now knight g6, attacking the weakness that has, attacking what is now a weakness. The knight was there to defend, but now he's not around to defend as easily. He does play to d3, and I'm not so sure how secure a square this is for the knight. One might think, well, I can kick it away. The knight, when he does play to d3, he's there to defend and he's there to attack, but what are you doing after c4? Well, fortunately, white still has a good reply. It would be knight c5, and this capture of a pawn would be quite temporary. At the end of it, the pawn will be won back, and the big question is, what exactly is this rook on a8 doing now that the position has opened right up? Well, there's not a good answer to that, and white would be in the driver's seat in that particular line. So we don't have c4, but rather the more convenient b6, something black wanted to do anyway. So to get the king to b7, and it's defending c5. Knight e2 is played, focusing on f4, and this next move is one that will remind many players of Game 1 of the 1972 World Chess Championship match between Boris Spassky and Bobby Fischer. Move 18, bishop takes a2, quite similar to the move we saw in Game 1 of the 1972 championship, where Fischer grabbed a pawn on h2 and eventually had that bishop trapped with g3 and eventually lost the game. Might that same thing happen here? Well, a similar move was played, b3, and it's quite common to not make these types of pawn grabs because of this particular follow-up. And now you're finding your bishop trapped. He has no safe squares. But there is a good follow-up, and the follow-up is c4, the only reply, hitting the knight and trying to break at this structure. The knight retreats. Of course, if this captures here, the bishop is free to run away. There will be no trapping the bishop, but after knight on d to c1, the bishop is hit. C takes b, c takes b, the bishop is now hit twice, and bishop b1 is the only safe square, and there's really not a way to trap him. He will get away by way of bishop e4 or bishop to f5. So Anand with this variation has clearly given up a pawn, but is now in a position to set these pawns in motion. And that's what we have. f4 comes, and now king to b7. Initially, you might think this move is played to connect rooks. It's there to activate the a8 rook, but actually, the primary function of that move, believe it or not, is to vacate the c8 square for the bishop. That's a pretty interesting feature, or at least one of the interesting features of this game 4. What to do now after Anand's knight c3? Well, it's actually a very forcing line. The bishop has only one safe square, and it's f5. And after g4, the only safe square is c8. The bishop must return home. He can't go to e6 because of a fork, and he clearly cannot play to d7. So he must return home. And if you're just looking at the game from this point on, your first quick thought might be, at least concerning the bishop, Black didn't move the bishop yet, but he certainly did. What an interesting journey he had, grabbing down on a2, posting on b1, f5, and then running back home. Very interesting sequence of moves. We have, as a follow-up now, knight to d3. f4 is hit, and I had thought knight e2 would be played. It seemed a bit unnatural to me to obstruct the rook's view on the d-file, but certainly there is another key point to having the knight on d3 opposed to e2. What exactly does it do different, or what more does it do? Well, it watches over e5, and this is important because now when f5 is played, there won't be knight takes on e5. If the knight is on e2, this would be a blunder. So it is after bishop c8, after he returns home, it's knight d3, f5 is not long off. Black now tries to break down this structure. Anand is not going to be so quick to give up a light square on the king's side. f5 now comes, and Black is getting rocked back. White again down a pawn, but pushing Black around. Knight b5. Another interesting feature of this game is what? We're seeing a lot of play on the king side. Many white pawns advanced. Black is also taking part with some action on the king side. We also have action in the center. The rook's doubled on the d-file, and Anand is now, with this last move, reminding Carlsen that there is some pressure on the queen side. So the whole board is being made use of, and there's additional pressure right around the corner. So first we have Carlsen open up the H file, which gives a new possibility to the H8 rook, and he hops right to it. There is an additional move of A6, and we'll have a look at these two particular moves on this move 28 for black. The move order does matter. You might think you could play rook h4 and then on the next move a6, but that's not necessarily the case. Let's have a look. After the move played in the game, rook h4, the knight does play to f2 to defend. And now if you think you could play a6 and chase the knight away to d4 or c3, well, keep in mind he has this additional square, d6. After he is taken, the pawn hits the knight, and after he runs away, d6 is there and the rooks are there, or d7 is there and the rooks are there to defend the pawn. This isn't necessarily bad for black, but it certainly makes the king position a little bit more vulnerable, I guess you could say. Maybe the rooks one day can penetrate on this 7th rank and start to grab some pawns. The material will be won back. But keep in mind that by playing a6 first instead of rook to h4, this knight d6 move is no longer available, because after takes, and d6, well, the rooks, keep in mind, are obstructed by the knight on d3. So we would just have bishop takes pawn, whereas in the other variation, after rook to h4, the knight is there to defend g4 and clears the way for the rooks to eventually support this pawn to advance to d7. So move order, just a quick instance of, or a quick example of how exactly move order can certainly matter. So it's now knight c6. Knight c6 is played. Rook c2. Anand now focuses his attention on the c6 knight as well as the c7 pawn. a5. I at first thought, my first thought was this with this move is I thought it was a mouse slip. That's what I had said jokingly during the live stream that I was doing. I was thinking a6 would be the move to try to kick the knight away finally, but keep in mind what white can be doing in reply to the threat on the knight. Nothing. He could ignore it and focus his sights on c6. If the knight is taken, white is there to recapture and then some, because c6 will fall and white is in the driver's seat. So what about bishop d7? Well, now we could try to kick away. We could try to deflect the bishop from its defense of the knight with e6. And after a couple captures, can you come back here with the bishop? Well, not so fast. Knight d4 is now available. The knight is hit for a third time. He's only defended twice, and he cannot be defended for a third time. Knight takes knight. That's not working. Black ends up getting checkmated. So what black can do, if this is in fact a line, is after the capture on e6 to not move the bishop but rather take the knight, allow the bishop to be captured, and now there's still some issue on c6. Black is actually still there to defend the knight, but now comes the knight. The white knight into d3, and this line I'm showing you here is certainly being shown with the help of a computer. If black is now doubling on the h file, there is a very interesting sacrifice that could come about on the c6 square with knight e5 to follow, and at the end of it all, black is giving up the rook for a pawn. But keep in mind the black king is very active, the white king not so much. White grabs this pawn. At the end of this very long-winded variation, we will end up having this position be a draw. The black king will hunt this pawn down, and in the meantime, the white king scoots over, and eventually we'll have the knight sacrificing itself for the two remaining black pawns. So just a very interesting line that I came across, one of the many that I came across when reviewing for this video. We did not get to see those sort of complications. We did not see in this game a6, but rather a5, and the intention behind that is to activate the rook by simply not even moving it, but by moving the pawn in front of the rook, just as we saw here on the h file. We had an h5 move, there was a capture, and the rook was freed in that way. Well, Carlsen is trying a similar thing to activate his queen rook by getting in the a4 move. Anand sees this, of course, and plays rook c4, stopping the a4 advance. There's also some lateral support to the g4 pawn. What now follows is g6, looking to break down this structure, and this here was another interesting possibility for Carlsen, one which could have led to two different imbalanced positions. One where white would have a knight versus three black pawns, or one where white would have two knights versus a black rook and two pawns. Let me show you. After bishop takes f5, this was not the move that was played. The move that was played was g6, but we could have had bishop takes on f5, and after the recapture, takes, knight here, and now this is the situation we're in, where it's a white knight versus three black pawns, imbalanced position. Another variant of that would be after bishop takes on f5 to take on c6, and in this one we're entering the knight, or two knights versus a rook and two pawns. We did not go down either of those roads, but an interesting possibility was this moment right here after rook c4 to actually capture on f5. Instead, it was g6, and now comes more pressure against the knight. It is defended, and now white tries to kick the bishop away, similar to a variation I had shown already. And after the capture on f6, the recapture, the bishop can drop back, and unlike the other this one variation I showed where the knight played to d4, this knight can be captured successfully. At the end of this variation, this will not turn out to be checkmate. Previously, there was a pawn on a6, and it would have led to mate with both rooks getting on the 7th and 8th ranks, but not the case here since a6 is now available to the king. So an additional difference between this a6 move and a5 move in some lines, having now a6 available to that black king. So we wouldn't have knight d7 here, but what was played is knight to e4, yet another interesting point in the game, allowing black to grab another pawn, and this time to do so with check. That's what we have. Rook grabs on g4 with check. Anand improves his king position. Keep in mind, white is now down 2 points, 2 pawns, but has very active pieces. A lot of pressure on the black position, the knight on c6, pressure on c7, a centralized knight, and a much more centralized white king. Not so much, it's not so harmonious, let's say, on the black side. Carlsen is still needing to untangle. So after king f2, we had rook f4 and king to e3. This here was another interesting opportunity for Carlsen. Instead of rook f4, there is rook to d8 available. Now one might have thought after king f2, this here is a threat, or in other words, to give check to the king with a discovered attack on the rook. He is tactically vulnerable since he's unprotected. Rook d8 still is available, allowing this check. He could be taken, and after rook takes rook, black would have a very good reply. Knight e5, hitting the rook, and there's also a discovered attack against the knight. There could be a check, but after king b8, this is held together by a thread, but it's going to fall apart soon. Black will get some material back black will get some material back, and black is better. So rook d8 was an option at this moment right here after king to f2. We could have saw rook d8, but it instead was rook f4. Black is now being attacked here. The white king is more central. Carlsen drops back to f8, and now comes knight d4. This is a very forcing line. Knight takes. We don't recapture just yet on d4. We take on c7 with check first. King a6 is available. Only now do we recapture. Carlsen gets his rook involved. Anand gets out of the way, and we have now met time control here. We met time control at this moment right here after king takes d4, Anand's 40th move. And so he gains an additional hour at this point. And this here is Carlsen's 40th move, rook to d8, giving check. And the decision here by Anand is king to c3. King to e3 was the other possibility, but I believe the decision to play king to c3 is based on the following. I believe it is at this point from here on out that Anand is wanting to achieve a position where it is a one rook apiece and just these 3 pawns, a 2-to-1 advantage in favor of black, but with just a single pair of rooks on the board, it's a well-known and a fairly easy draw to hold, especially at this very high level of play. So the white king, in other words, wants to stick around near this b3 pawn and be prepared for that eventual simplification of the position. So it is king to c3. Black gives a check, king to b2. Black gets behind this passed pawn, of course, still hitting the knight. White has to do something about that, and it was rook c8. And Carlsen is not so quick to exchange a pair of rooks. If we did have rook takes rook, we have the recapture, and what exactly is black going to do with the bishop? Not too many options are available. If the bishop plays to b5, knight d6, all of a sudden black is close to getting mated. There is a save here, surprisingly enough. It would be bishop c6. It could be taken, but now white is in this very awkward pin, not so easy to get out of. White would need some help by the white king. For example, king c3. In the meantime, the black pawn will march. At the end of it, this seems like it will still turn out to be a draw. So we don't have that line, another interesting one that came about. And we did not have, after rook c8, this capture, but instead black functioning on white's third rank, putting pressure on the b3 pawn. And now comes rook check, king b7, and only then the capture on e8. This is an important point. If you're going with an immediate capture of the bishop, later on this king could be more influential by playing to b5 immediately. So before capturing the bishop, this rook to a8 move is essentially decentralizing the king. King b7 is a necessity, as otherwise king b5 is met with a knight check, and only then you can pick up the bishop. So it is first king b7, then you grab the bishop, the knight is recaptured, and now the pawn advances. Again, Anand is looking now for a single pair of rooks, and just this situation over here where it's 2 pawns versus 1, and the king's right nearby their own pawns. Rook g3 interferes with this idea of white maybe trying to track down the g pawn. Carlsen does not allow that. Rook g3 is it. Rook c3 welcoming an exchange. A check is thrown in. That is avoided. And now there's pressure on b3. How to defend that square, or how to defend the pawn? Well, you could defend it indirectly with king to a2. This pawn cannot be captured. It will not be captured with check. And that is a very important detail because just for that one moment, white is able to now give check himself and then promote. White is winning, clearly. So king a2 is an indirect defense of the b3 pawn. Now follows g5, advancing the passed pawn, rook d2. There's not much, there's not a great way really to improve the position of the rook. He has very little choices. These were his three options, but d2 is best since there is now the possibility to give checks to the black king, to question the black king's position. Rook e5, rook d7 check, king c6, and now rook on e to d8. There is some possibilities to be giving check on the 6th rank. Carlsen is there to defend. And now we have a check thrown in, king b7, and keep in mind if king c5, if he's going to the 5th rank, here is one way that Anand can force that situation that I keep referencing, where it's just a single pair of rooks and just these three pawns on the board. We could have the pawn promoting, and after it is captured, to not take right away. Taking right away would allow what exactly? It would allow black to hang on to the g pawn. The rook could get behind, but black is there to defend. So the important move to insert here is after the queen, and after it's taken, you give this check on d5 first, and only then take on e8. This makes all the difference in the world because after it is recaptured, white is able to pick up that pawn, and we enter the situation white has been striving for since around move 40. So we don't have that particular line. Instead of the king playing to the 5th rank, it's king b7. And now we have a check thrown in, king a6, rook to d5, once again welcoming these trades. If takes, takes, we're going to have these two pawns come off the board. But one last little trick is thrown in here by Carlsen. First giving a check, kicking the king up to a3, and now avoiding the rook exchange by playing rook to e6. It's allowing this pawn to be captured, but it better not be captured because of b5. And all of a sudden, white is finding themselves in a mating net with b4 on the horizon and rook a2 to follow. There would not be a good reply for white in this position. But Anand is not going to fall for that, even if he is in time pressure, or even if he is under time pressure, which he was around this point in the game, still needing to make 4 more moves to get to that move 60, where he would then gain 15 minutes with then a 30-second increment. So we did not have rook takes g5, but rather rook to d8. And now comes g4. Only now does the rook get behind the pawn. Rook takes. The rook gives a check. King b7. With this last move, Anand has made time control. He is in no hurry to capture on g4 and is now in a position to not just grab the pawn, but also, again, trade a pair of rooks. So what was played here, finishing up, is a4. White grabs the pawn, a takes b. Now with this move, making sure that a pair of rooks will come off. This here is finally coming down to a drawn position. There is no way to successfully advance this pawn. The idea here will be to always prevent the black king from being able to be in front of the black pawn. As soon as black is forced to have the pawn in front of the king, the white rook will always come behind and give checks to the black king. This is the point right here where both players actually decided on a draw. They shook hands, and we are still tied up in this World Chess Championship match, but this is without a doubt the most exciting game of the match, and a really, really cool game to watch during the live stream. And I look forward, as usual, to these next games coming up. Round 5 should be very, very interesting, but a very, very fighting type of game we just saw here. And again, I'm looking forward to these upcoming games. So that's all for this video. As always, I hope you got something out of it. Take care. Bye.